It started like any other evening drive. The kind of late afternoon where the sky melts into streaks of amber and gold, and the city breathes a little slower. Sacramento pulsed with quiet exhaustion as professionals filtered out of office buildings, chasing dinner tables, silence, or something close to peace. Eric Porter was one of them. His sedan glided through the lanes with a soft hum, air conditioning tuned just right, the low murmur of jazz spilling from the radio like a gentle exhale. Everything about him spoke of order, routine, a man ending his day on a quiet note. But peace is a fragile thing. It can vanish in a flash of blue and red. As Eric approached a yellow light, he eased off the accelerator, allowing his car to coast gently to a stop as the light flipped to red. And just then, sirens. A sudden burst of noise and color fractured the moment. Blue and red lights spun wildly in his rearview mirror. Eric's brow furrowed. He blinked once, twice, before calmly signaling and pulling over to the shoulder. The world around him slowed, but something inside him sharpened. He reached for the window switch and rolled it down. Behind him, the cruiser came to a stop. Out stepped Officer Bradley Larson, mid-30s, close-cropped buzz cut, sunglasses tucked into the front of his uniform shirt, and a badge that seemed to gleam just a little harder than it should have. His walk was that of a man used to owning every inch of the pavement he touched, confident, controlled. Or at least, he thought he was. "License and registration," he said, voice clipped, authoritative. Not hostile, not warm, just detached, with an undertone that suggested this was already more than routine. Eric moved deliberately, silently, retrieving his documents. His hands were steady, his breathing calm. But he could feel Larson's gaze, too intense, too focused, like he wasn't looking for a license but for a reason to push further. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Larson asked, leaning just a little too far into the open window. Eric's reply was level. "I'm not entirely sure, officer." "You didn't come to a full stop," Larson answered, though his voice wavered just enough to betray uncertainty. Eric raised a brow. "I slowed down, but I understand." Larson didn't respond. Not really. Instead, he stared, hard. His eyes scanned Eric, studying every line in his face, every detail of his suit, every second of his silence. He wasn't seeing a traffic stop anymore. He was seeing something else, something he couldn't name but felt entitled to judge. "You're not from around here, are you?" the officer asked, tone shifting subtly. "I moved here recently. My address is on the license," Eric replied, still composed, still polite. But Larson wasn't really listening anymore. His questions started to carry an edge, thinly veiled, heavy with implications. Something unspoken began circling the air, thickening it. Eric could feel it. But he didn't flinch, he didn't need to, because this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. And today, he wasn't just any man driving home from work. He was something far more dangerous to people like Officer Larson. A man who knew exactly how the system worked and who it was supposed to protect. And this stop? It was about to become the officer's worst mistake, the kind that changes everything. There's a moment in every confrontation when the air shifts. It's not always visible. It's not loud. But it tightens, like a thread being pulled between two people, one trying to dominate, the other refusing to break. That moment came, when Officer Larson took a half step back, folded Eric's documents with a slow, deliberate smugness, and tucked them into his chest pocket. He didn't say anything at first, just straightened his shoulders like he was preparing for something. And then came the words, cold and clipped, "Step out of the car for me." Eric's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. For half a second, the silence roared louder than the city around them. His jaw tensed, but his face? Calm. Impeccably calm. "Is there a specific reason for that, officer?" Larson's lips twitched. Not a smile, not exactly. More like the ghost of a smirk trying to hide itself behind protocol. "I asked you to step out of the car. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." There it was. The threat. Unspoken but undeniable, wrapped in formality but pointed like a blade. Eric's breath came slow and even. He clicked open the door and stepped out, tall and unthreatening in his tailored suit, polished shoes gleaming under the streetlight. The kind of man who looked like he belonged behind a boardroom table, not the hood of a car. But none of that mattered to Larson. None of it registered. "Hands where I can see them," the officer barked. Eric complied without hesitation, raising his palms with smooth precision. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" "Just routine," Larson replied, the corners of his mouth curling faintly. "We've had some incidents around here. You can never be too careful." Eric turned his head slightly, his voice calm but cutting. "Incidents involving men in business suits driving late-model sedans? Or does this have more to do with something else?" The question landed like a stone dropped in still water. Larson's composure cracked, just for a second. He straightened up, hand drifting toward his belt in a reflex more instinctual than necessary. "Watch your tone. I'm simply asking a question." There was no challenge in Eric's voice. No raised pitch, no panic, just a firm, unwavering presence that unsettled Larson more than shouting ever could. Larson leaned in, eyes narrowing. "You seem awfully familiar with how this works. You got something to hide?" Eric didn't answer right away. He let the silence stretch. Let the tension fill the space between them until it trembled. Then, "No, officer. I just believe in being clear about the reasons for an interaction like this. Transparency, you know." Larson scoffed. He began to pace. Slow, circular steps like a wolf trying to decide if its prey is really prey. But something about Eric was throwing him off. The lack of fear, the lack of stammering. No nervous hands, no shifting feet. Just stillness. Poise. That unshakable, "Come." "You seem pretty confident," Larson muttered almost to himself. "Like you think you know what's going to happen next." Eric tilted his head, voice even. "Confidence isn't the issue here, officer. Respect is." Larson stopped pacing. He turned, jaw tight. The smirk was gone, replaced by something sharper, anger laced with confusion. The narrative was slipping away from him and he could feel it. And so, he doubled down. "Turn around and place your hands on the hood." Eric blinked once. "Weapons?" he asked, incredulous, though his voice never rose. "You heard me," Larson snapped. "I'm not going to ask you again." Eric hesitated, for just a moment. A flicker of something unreadable passed behind his eyes, but then, wordlessly, he turned and placed his palms on the hood of his car. Larson moved in. The crunch of his boots on the pavement echoed through the silence. His hands patted Eric down in quick, rough motions. Too firm, too long, searching for something that wasn't there. But Eric didn't flinch, didn't twitch. He absorbed it all with the cold grace of a man who'd endured worse, and walked away stronger. "You're clean," Larson muttered. It sounded like a defeat. Eric turned slowly, face unreadable but eyes razor-sharp. "Of course I am," he said quietly. "Now, officer, if you're done." "I'm not done," Larson snapped, cutting him off. His voice rose, sharp with the panic of a man losing control of a story he thought he was writing. "You seem to know a lot about what I can and can't do. Care to explain why?" Eric folded his arms. He didn't move, didn't step back. "I've had my fair share of interactions with law enforcement," he said. "Let's just say I've learned a lot over the years." Larson's nostrils flared. "That so? You a lawyer or something?" Eric smiled faintly. Or something. That smile, so slight, so calm, was the breaking point. Larson stepped in close. Too close, his voice dropping to a growl. "Listen, you think you're smarter than me? You think you can talk your way out of this?" Eric didn't back down. He didn't blink. He didn't even raise his voice. "I don't think anything, officer. I just believe in fairness. And so far, I'm not seeing much of it here." Silence. Then, "Fairness?" Larson sneered, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. You think this is about fairness? People like you always... He stopped himself. But it was too late. The words were already hanging in the air like smoke from a gun that had just gone off. People. Like you. Eric didn't react, not visibly, but his body shifted ever so slightly, like steel settling into place. The calmness wasn't passive anymore. It had become weaponized, focused. People like me, he repeated, voice low, almost a whisper, but with the weight of a sledgehammer. Larson took a step back. His mask was gone now, his confidence shattered, replaced by something raw and real. Fear. You know what I meant, he muttered, the bravado gone. I think I do, Eric replied. He wasn't angry. He didn't raise his voice. But every word was sharpened to a point. And that was the moment. The moment the power shifted. The moment the mask fell off. The moment the audience finally saw who Officer Larson really was. And that's when everything changed. Eric took a breath and reached for his badge. Eric's fingers moved slowly, deliberately. No sudden gestures, no panic, just precision. His tone remained level, almost conversational, as if he were chatting with a neighbor. I'm reaching for my badge, he said calmly, eyes locked, on Larson's. Larson twitched. His hand drifted toward the weapon on his belt, not drawing it, but hovering near it, the muscle memory of a man trained to anticipate threats. But Eric wasn't a threat, not in the way Larson understood. Not in the way he could control. There's no need for theatrics, Eric continued, his voice steady, unwavering. I want you to see it. Clearly. Out came the leather wallet. A smooth motion, a practiced hand. He flipped it open and held it out at chest level. A gleam caught the last bit of daylight. A gold shield, pristine and official, framed by the embossed seal of the Sacramento Police Department. Eric Porter, he said evenly, head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division. Larson froze. His eyes darted from the badge to Eric's face and back again. Disbelief etched into every corner of his expression. For a second, he stood paralyzed, like a man watching a house collapse that he thought he'd built with bricks. Internal Affairs. He repeated under his breath, the words landing with a thud in his chest. His voice cracked, no longer clipped, no longer in control. Yes, Eric said, cutting him off gently, saving him the humiliation of finishing the thought. I oversee officer conduct. My job is to ensure that the people who wear this badge, he gestured to Larson's chest, uphold the values and integrity it's meant to represent. Larson's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His shoulders, once squared and rigid, began to sag under an invisible weight. That badge he'd worn all day suddenly felt heavy, like it knew it had just been used as a weapon instead of a shield. Eric didn't move closer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The most troubling part of this interaction, he said softly, isn't the profiling, though that's bad enough. And it's not the baseless escalation either, which, again, is concerning. He paused. The silence cut deeper than any shout could have. It's that you did all of this, without even realizing who you were talking to. Larson looked like a man who had been dropped into deep water and only just realized he couldn't swim. He opened his mouth to speak, to defend, to claw back some sense of authority, but nothing came. You assumed I wouldn't know my rights, that I wouldn't understand the laws you're sworn to uphold. Eric continued, his words like precision-guided strikes. And why? He let that hang. Let Larson choke on the space between words. Because I didn't fit your idea of someone deserving respect. That line landed like a hammer. Larson winced, like he'd just been struck. Because in truth, he had, not physically, but morally. His entire posture shifted. The cop who swaggered to the car minutes ago had vanished, replaced by a man who now looked smaller in every possible way. Eric took a step back, giving Larson room. Not out of mercy, but out of control. It was a reminder. I'm the one in charge here. I choose what happens next. Here's what's going to happen, Eric said, his voice low, his tone surgical. You're going to take a step back. You're going to return my license and registration. And you're going to think very carefully about what you say next." Larson hesitated. The man who never hesitated. For a beat, it looked like he might push back. Pride, even when wounded, sometimes lashes out in desperation. But then Eric added, almost in a whisper, but no less powerful, "You'll hear from me again. Not as a driver you pulled over on the side of the road, but as the man who decides if you get to keep wearing that badge." That did it. Larson's face flushed red. His hands, once so firm and commanding, now trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket. He pulled out the folded license and registration, his fingers fumbling like he was touching evidence of his own mistake. Eric took them without a word. No gloating, no victory speech, just a quiet nod of finality. He turned and walked toward his car. Every step was deliberate, no rush, no stumble. Just a man who knew the power he held and chose to wield it with restraint. He placed one hand on the door handle, then paused. Without turning fully around, he glanced back over his shoulder. His voice was soft, but it hit like a verdict. "Remember? This, Officer Larson." A pause, a beat of air. "The badge doesn't make you better than anyone, it makes you accountable to everyone." Eric opened the door and slid into his seat. The engine hummed to life with the same quiet confidence he'd carried the entire time. He didn't peel away. He didn't make a scene. But the silence he left behind was deafening. Larson stood frozen, backlit by the fading light. His cruiser, behind him. His authority in shambles. His confidence shattered. The sky had turned a deep orange now, a final act of beauty before night took over. And in that final sliver of sunlight, Officer Bradley Larson stood alone, with a badge that suddenly felt heavier than ever. The morning after the stop, Sacramento was quiet, but Eric's mind wasn't. He sat in his office, the blinds casting stripes of morning light across his desk. A steaming cup of black coffee sat untouched, growing cold as he stared at the file. In front of him, the name stamped across the manila folder in all caps, Officer Bradley Larson. It wasn't just the traffic stop that had brought this folder to the forefront. Eric had seen this name before. He just hadn't had a reason until now to dig deeper. And what he found wasn't shocking. Not to him. Larson's record was far from spotless. Vague misconduct reports, complaints filed and then quietly dismissed. Patterns that were ignored because no one wanted to ask the bigger questions. Excessive stops. Use of unclear language. Accusations of intimidation. Always minor, always explainable, always swept aside. It wasn't that Larson was the problem. It was that he was the symptom. The knock on his office door was soft, but it pulled him from the weight of the page. "Come in," he called, his voice low. Linda stepped in, holding a neat stack of files. "Morning, Mr. Porter. These are the summaries from last month's misconduct cases. Also, Chief Daniels wanted me to remind you about the department review next week." Eric nodded slowly. "Thanks, Linda." She hesitated, just enough for him to notice. "Is everything all right?" she asked. He looked up. "Not yet," he said. "Can you do one more thing? Schedule a meeting with Chief Daniels for this afternoon." She studied his expression, caught the seriousness in his voice. "Of course." When she left, Eric turned back to Larson's file, but his eyes weren't focused on the text anymore. His thoughts were miles deeper. This wasn't just about one officer who got too comfortable with abusing his authority. This was about a culture, a system that had taught men like Larson they were untouchable. That silence was standard. That as long as things were quiet, no real damage was being done. Eric knew better. Quiet doesn't fix anything. The meeting with Chief Daniels was scheduled for 3 p.m. sharp. Eric walked into the conference room early, files in hand, resolve in his eyes. Daniels was already seated, a man in his 60s, salt and pepper hair, a career cop who wore his badge like a second skin. He didn't look surprised to see Eric, but he did look tired. "Morning, Eric," he said, motioning to the seat across. From him, Eric sat without a word, opened his folder, and laid out the facts like cards on a table. "I want to talk about Officer Larson," he began, calm but unblinking. Daniels raised an eyebrow. The traffic stop? Yes, but not just that, Eric said, sliding the file forward. I pulled his record. This isn't a one-time issue. It's a trend. And the system let it happen. Daniels exhaled, leaned back in his chair. Eric, I won't pretend we haven't had complaints about Larson, but he's never crossed the line badly enough to warrant formal action. Until now. And that's the problem, Eric replied, leaning in. We wait until someone crosses a line so clearly that we can't ignore it. By then the damage is already done. To the people, to the department, to public trust. Daniels looked at him carefully. What are you proposing? A department-wide review, Eric said without hesitation. Not just of individual officers, but of our entire internal culture. How we train, how we supervise, how we hold people accountable. Everything. Daniels was silent for a moment. Then he chuckled, dry, not unkind. You're going to ruffle some feathers with that one? Eric's lips curved slightly. Good, he said. It's about time someone did. The weeks that followed were anything but quiet. Eric didn't sit behind his desk pushing papers. He was in the field, meeting with officers, reviewing footage, speaking with community leaders. He hosted public forums where residents could speak openly, some for the first time, about their experiences with law enforcement. He listened, he asked questions, and more importantly, he acted. Every day brought resistance, from officers who resented the scrutiny, from union reps who warned him about political fallout, even from city officials who preferred calm over confrontation. But Eric didn't flinch, because the truth was simple. Calm had protected corruption for too long. He worked late into the night, sifting through cases like Larson's, officers who walked the line, sometimes over it, but always escaped accountability because the system made it easy, too easy. And slowly the tide began to shift. Internal Affairs opened formal proceedings against Larson. Eric made no secret of his presence in the room. He sat across from the officer, no longer on a quiet road under fading sunlight, but in a courtroom of consequence. Larson avoided Eric's gaze, but there was no place to hide now. The hearing resulted in a suspension, not termination yet, but it was a public mark, a stain that would follow, and more importantly, it was a warning to others. But Eric wasn't done. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about Larson anymore. It was about what came next. Months later, Eric stood at a podium in front of a packed community center. Officers, city leaders, journalists, families, victims, skeptics. He didn't need a loud voice to be heard. Justice, he said, isn't just about catching the bad guys. He paused, scanning the room. It's about making sure the people who wear this badge are worthy of it, that they serve with integrity, fairness, respect. The crowd was silent, not because they weren't listening, but because they were. Eric's voice didn't tremble. It rang with quiet purpose, with the kind of clarity you can't fake. Change doesn't come easy, he said. It doesn't come fast. But it comes when people stop accepting the way things are and start demanding better, and that starts with us. Thunderous applause followed. But Eric didn't soak it in. He stepped down from the podium with the same calm purpose that had carried him through every step of this journey. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new fight. Because this wasn't about punishing one man. It was about stopping the next one before he ever gets the chance to start. The air inside the community hall was thick with anticipation. Folded chairs filled every corner, rows of citizens shoulder to shoulder with officers, city council members, and press. Some came with open minds. Some came with crossed arms. But all of them came because change was no longer a rumor. It had a name, and tonight it had a voice. Eric Porter stood at the podium, not in uniform, but in his quiet authority. No theatrics, no slideshow, just truth. I want to be clear, he began, scanning the room slowly, letting every word sink in. This isn't about blame. This isn't about targeting one person or even one department. His voice was steady, not loud, but it didn't need to be. This is about responsibility. Shared responsibility. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some nods, some folded arms shifting. He let the moment breathe. We talk about justice like it's a finish line, but it's not, he said. It's a compass. It's not just about catching the bad guys. It's about making sure the people we give power to deserve it, that they earn it every single day. Someone in the back clapped. Then another. Then silence again. I've been stopped before, Eric continued. Many times. Most of them didn't make headlines, but they left scars. Not because of what was done, but because of what was assumed. He let that hang in the air. And I know I'm not alone. He pointed gently to the front row, where a young black man sat beside his mother, his face unreadable, his jaw clenched. Eric's eyes locked on his. You should never have to be calm just to stay alive. You should never have to memorize your rights like a shield. And you should never have to wonder if the person pulling you over sees you as a human being. Or a threat. The young man blinked, but he didn't look away. Eric turned back to the crowd. We are building a department that does more than enforce law. We're building one that earns trust, that listens, that learns. One that remembers the badge is not a symbol of control. He paused, but of accountability. Now the silence shifted. A few officers in uniform nodded. Some community members leaned in closer. He smiled, not for show, but with purpose. This won't change overnight. I know that. But I'm not standing here alone. And I never will be again. He stepped down from the podium slowly, met with a wave of applause, some thunderous, some polite, but all real. He walked past rows of faces, hopeful, skeptical, curious, wounded. But they were all listening. Outside, the night air was cool. The streets of Sacramento stretched ahead of him, still imperfect, still unfinished. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was walking them alone. There was still work to do. But now, the system was listening. And this time it would change from the inside out. If this story hit you deep, share it. Because this isn't just fiction. This is real. This is America. And next time, we're taking this higher. Subscribe, because episode 2 is already in motion. And trust me, you'll want to see who Eric faces next.